There's a kind of betrayal that wakes a person up in seconds when someone is about to be rushed into emergency surgery, and all they ask is for their parents to watch their twins for a few hours. But what they get back is a message calling them a nuisance and a burden because the parents already had plans to see Taylor Swift with the favored sister. The worst part isn't being left alone, it's being reduced to a problem, especially when that same person has been quietly carrying the family for years. People love to say family is where you belong, but there's another truth nobody wants to face: some families only love you when you're useful. So when love turns into a one-way transaction, what's the right move? Keep paying the price just to hold on to the title of good son, or stop before it costs you your entire life? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy this kind of real raw storytelling, subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Now, let's listen to him from the heart. I'm Riven Halstead, 31. Cardiology resident at University of Colorado Hospital in Aurora. On paper that sounds impressive, like a life that's locked in stable, respectable. In real life it looks like coffee breath at 5 a.m., scrubs that never quite lose the smell of antiseptic, and a calendar that belongs to everyone but me. And it looks like 2 3-year-olds Ren and Cove padding into my room in mismatched pajamas while I'm still half asleep asking for waffles like it's the most reasonable thing in the world. I'm their dad. Full-time. The kind of single parent people say with a soft voice like it automatically comes with a support group and casseroles. What it actually comes with is learning to brush a little girl's hair with one hand while tying a toddler's shoes with the other, remembering daycare show and tell while reading EKGs in your head, and keeping your face calm even when your chest feels like it's being squeezed in a fist. My mornings are a performance. Not for the hospital there, you can look tired. There, everyone's tired. My performance is for my kids. Ren watches my eyes more than my words. Cove copies my energy like a mirror. If I look scared, they get scared. If I look steady, the world stays steady. That's the thing about being the reliable one. You don't just carry your own life, you carry everyone else's comfort too. I'd been that person for as long as I can remember. The one who didn't make things hard. The one who figured it out. The one who didn't ask for much. Even with my parents. Even with my sister. Even after everything, there was still a part of me that clung to this naive, stubborn thought. They're still my parents. When it matters, when it really matters, they'll show up. I learned how wrong I was on a Tuesday night. It had been one of those shifts that stretches time until it doesn't feel real anymore. 16 hours on the floor, consults stacked on consults, alarms and pages, and the steady hum of people trying not to die. By the time I left, my body felt hollowed out, but I wasn't reckless. I wasn't falling asleep at the wheel. I was alert in the way residents learn to be alert, running on adrenaline and duty. I was driving home thinking about nothing and everything. Ren's new obsession with dinosaurs. Cove insisting he could fix the toaster with a spoon. The babysitter's note about snack time. Bills. A case from earlier that wouldn't leave my mind. The light turned green. I eased into the intersection. And then there was a sound like metal tearing open the world. A truck too fast, too close, blew through the red light like it didn't exist. I didn't even have time to swear. It hit my driver's side with a force that made the air leave my lungs. Glass exploded. The steering wheel jerked. The inside of the car became a storm of noise and impact, and then... blank. When I came back, it was in fragments. Someone shouting my name. A pressure against my shoulder. The nauseating sway of movement. A siren that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Riven. Riven, can you hear me? I forced my eyes open. Everything was too bright and too close. My vision narrowed and widened like a bad camera lens. There was a face above me, familiar, focused. Idris, I rasped, though the word came out wrong. Dr. Idris Kane, ER physician. We'd worked side by side for 2 years. The kind of guy who stayed calm when everyone else spun out, the kind of colleague you were grateful for without ever saying it out loud. You were in a collision, he said, fast, but controlled. We're taking you in. I think you're bleeding internally. My stomach, no, my abdomen felt like it was on fire, a deep spreading heat. My hands trembled against the straps holding me still. I tried to shift, but the movement sent a sharp pain through me that stole my breath. Emergency surgery, Idris added. He didn't soften it. He didn't pretend. We need to move. The word surgery hit me like another impact, not because of the knife, not because of the fear of anesthesia, because of Wren and Cove. My kids, I said, grabbing at his sleeve with fingers that didn't feel like they belonged to me. Wren. Cove. They're with your sitter, Idris asked. He already knew me well enough to guess. Yes. I swallowed hard. My throat tasted like pennies. She leaves at 8. Idris glanced at his watch. It's 7:15. 45 minutes. I had 45 minutes to find someone to be in my house with my children before the babysitter walked out the door. 45 minutes to keep my kids from waking up and finding the world empty. My phone was somewhere near my hip, sticky with my own blood. I fumbled for it, smearing the screen as I unlocked it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it twice. I didn't scroll through options. I didn't weigh who was busy. I didn't think about pride. I called my parents. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. 4. My dad answered like I'd interrupted him. What Cal's voice was tight. Impatient. I could hear something in the background music movement, the muffled energy of people getting ready to leave. Dad, I said, forcing the words past pain. I'm in an ambulance. There was an accident. They're taking me to the hospital. I need surgery. A pause. Not the kind that meant concern. The kind that meant annoyance. I need you, I continued. I need you and Mom to go to my house, please. Just for a few hours. The twins. I heard my mother's voice sharp and close, like she was right beside him. I heard laughter after that. A familiar laugh. Marlo. My sister. They were together. All of them. Not scattered in their own lives. Not unreachable. Together. Hold on, my dad said, muffling the phone. I listened to the blur of their voices. My mother's tone irritated. My father's low, dismissive response. Marlo's laugh again, bright and careless. And then the line went quiet. My phone buzzed. Not a callback. A text notification. Family group chat. The message was from my mother, Lorraine. You've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Marlo tonight. Figure it out yourself. My breath caught so hard it felt like choking. I read it once, twice, 3 times, like the letters might rearrange into something else if I stared long enough. They didn't. Another message popped up, this time from my dad. You're a doctor. You're used to hospitals. Don't make this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. And then Marlo, no words. Just a laughing reaction like my life was a meme. I stared at the screen while the siren wailed on above me, while the ambulance rocked over potholes, while my body tried to leak out from the inside. I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. Something inside me just snapped into a clean, cold clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't them being overwhelmed. This wasn't bad timing. This was who they were when it mattered. Idris was watching me. I hadn't realized he could see the glow of my phone the way my thumb hovered over the messages like I couldn't move. What did they say? He asked carefully. I couldn't answer. Not because I couldn't speak, but because if I spoke, I might break in a way I didn't have time for. My phone's dying, I managed. I need internet. Without hesitating, Idris pulled his phone out and put it in my hand. I used it like a lifeline. I searched emergency nanny services, found one with 24-hour coverage. Called. Explained the situation in clipped sentences the way you talk when you're trying not to drown. I need someone at my house in Aurora, I said. 2 toddlers. Caregiver is leaving at 8. I'm going into emergency surgery. Yes, I'll pay whatever the rate is. Yes, triple is fine. Just get there. They asked questions. I answered. They told me they'd coordinate handoff with my current babysitter. They asked for permission to send daily photo updates. I said yes, 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 whatever you need, just keep my kids safe. It was done in minutes. When I handed Idris his phone back, my fingers were slick with sweat and blood. Can you screenshot those messages, I asked, holding up my own phone, before it dies. Idris didn't ask why. He didn't pretend he didn't understand. Yeah, he said softly. I can do that. I closed my eyes as the ambulance rolled into the bay. My abdomen felt like it was ripping open. But the pain wasn't what scared me anymore. The fear was quieter than pain. The fear was that I had just seen the truth of my family and I could never unsee it. The surgery lasted 4 hours. My spleen had ruptured. I'd been bleeding internally. Idris told me later that if the timing had been a little worse, if I'd waited, if the ambulance had hit heavier traffic, there was a good chance I wouldn't be here. I woke up in a haze of morphine and fluorescent lights, tubes, beeping monitors, nurses checking vitals. A thick ache in my abdomen that made every movement feel like punishment. 5 days in the hospital. Not one call from my parents, not one text, not one visit. The nanny service was expensive in a way that made me wince even through medication, but every day I got photos Ren eating strawberries at the kitchen table. Cove wearing his pajamas backward and grinning like he'd invented it. Both of them curled up on the couch with a blanket safe. Fed. Loved in the way kids understand love through presence. Strangers had stepped in where my family had stepped out. Idris stopped by too. Not dramatically. Just a quiet appearance in my doorway with coffee and that steady look like he wasn't going anywhere. How are you feeling? He asked. I stared at the ceiling for a second, then told the truth. Better, I said. My voice sounded like gravel. For the first time in years, I actually feel better. He didn't pry. He just nodded like he knew exactly what I meant. On day 3, I asked the nurse for my laptop. You should be resting, she warned, skeptical. I need to handle something, I said, and there was a flatness to my voice that made her stop arguing. My hands didn't shake when I logged into my bank account. The transfers were there like clockwork. The same amounts, the same dates, the same quiet bleeding I'd normalized. I canceled every automatic payment to my parents. Every recurring transfer. Every just this month arrangement that had become a life sentence. Then I opened my phone settings and blocked my dad's number, my mom's, Marlowe's. There wasn't a dramatic moment. No tears, no final message, no speech. It felt like setting down a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was there until the moment I didn't have it in my hands anymore. Lying there stitched up and sore, I told myself one simple thing. If my life wasn't enough for them to reschedule a concert, then my love sure as hell wasn't enough to earn what should have been given freely in the first place. I went home after 5 days. I moved slowly the way you move when your body is trying to remember itself. I kept my face calm for Ren and Cove. I smiled when they laughed. I whispered that Daddy was okay. And for a while, I almost believed the worst was over. Then 2 weeks later, on a quiet morning when the house smelled like pancakes and toddler shampoo, I heard a knock at my front door. 3 sharp knocks. And my heart rate spiked like I was back on the gurney. I wish I could tell you the knock was the first time I felt fear in my own house. It wasn't. The fear had been living in the background for years, hiding under routines and obligations. It just didn't have a name until that night in the ambulance. After the accident, people asked the obvious questions. Where were your parents? Where was your sister? Who watched the kids? I gave small answers because I didn't have the emotional bandwidth for big ones. I'd say they couldn't make it. I'd say it was complicated. I'd shrug like it didn't matter. But when the house finally quieted, when Ren and Cove were asleep and I could hear the refrigerator hum in the kitchen, I opened my laptop and stared at the spreadsheet I'd been keeping for years. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some master plan to expose them. It was just a habit. The kind you build when you don't feel safe. When you're always bracing for the next request, the next emergency, the next we're in a bind. Growing up, love in my family came with a ranking system. Marlo was the star. She always had been. She was 3 years older, effortless in the way some people are. Pretty charismatic, the kind of girl who could walk into a room and instantly become the center of it without trying. My parents lit up around her like she was a battery they needed to function. When she decided she wanted to work in fashion and branding, my mother cried happy tears. My dad called her gifted, visionary, a dreamer who would do big things. When I said I wanted to become a doctor, my dad nodded once. That's practical. That was it. Practical. I told myself it didn't matter. I buried myself in school because school was the one place the rules felt fair. Study hard, work hard, get results. I aced exams, got into a top program, dragged my way through undergrad and med school and residency with my head down. The day I graduated from medical school should have been a turning point. Instead, it was a familiar lesson. My parents showed up late. Not 5 minutes late, 2 hours. My mom hugged me, but she didn't quite look at me. My dad said he was proud, but his eyes kept flicking toward his phone. "Sorry, sweetheart," my mom murmured. Marlo had something important. Something important always meant Marlo. They took one photo with me in the parking lot. No flowers, no dinner, no celebration. They rushed off because Marlo needed emotional support after a meeting, and I stood there in my cap and gown with the sun baking the asphalt and that feeling I'd known my whole life settling in my chest. I was not the moment. I was the obligation. I tried to rationalize it like I always did. Fashion is competitive. Marlo needs more support. Medicine is stable. I can handle it. That last line, "he can handle it," became my identity. 8 years ago, right after I finished med school and started earning real money for the first time, my dad called me one evening. His voice had that strained embarrassment I used to mistake for humility. "Riven," he said, "we're in a bit of a bind. Mortgage is due and things are tight this month. Could you help us out? Just this once. Just this once." I transferred the money that night, no questions, no hesitation. They were my parents. I assumed this was what grown kids did. You help. You don't keep score. But just this once didn't stay once. It became the first of every month. Then it became the 15th. Then it became the random emergencies that somehow always landed when I had a break between rotations, like they knew my life well enough to time their crises. First, it was mortgage. Then health insurance premiums when my dad's work coverage changed. Then car repairs, home maintenance, a roof leak, a furnace, appliances. A string of problems that always sounded urgent and always ended with me opening my banking app and making the numbers move. I never said no. Not once. I didn't brag about it. I didn't mention it to coworkers. I didn't want praise. Honestly, I didn't even want thanks. I wanted a family that felt normal, one where helping didn't turn into a trap. I started tracking the payments in a spreadsheet without knowing why. Maybe it was just the part of my brain that likes data. Maybe it was the medical training that makes you document everything. Maybe it was a quiet, frightened part of me that needed proof that I wasn't imagining the weight I felt. The deeper I went into residency, the more my life narrowed into survival work, kids, sleep, when possible. Somewhere in there, I became a father of twins. That story is messy and tender and painful in its own way. But the important part is this. I didn't become a single dad because I wanted the credit. I became one because I didn't have a choice. When the twins were small, so small they fit in the crook of one arm each, I called my parents during one of the worst nights of my life. Ren was crying so hard she turned red. Cove wouldn't latch onto a bottle. I hadn't slept more than an hour. I had rounds in the morning. My hands were shaking from exhaustion. "I need help," I told my mom. "Even just for a day. I'm drowning." She sighed like I'd asked her to move a mountain. "Oh, honey," she said, "we wish we could. But Marlo is so stressed right now. She really needs us." And that was that. They didn't come. Not for a weekend. Not for the first month. Not when I sat on the kitchen floor at 3 a.m. with 2 babies screaming and tears sliding down my own face because I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt like a person. But the transfers still went out. Mortgage. Insurance. Emergency. I kept giving because I'd been trained to believe that being needed was the same as being loved. After the accident, lying in my hospital bed, I looked at the spreadsheet again with different eyes. 8 years. Lines and lines of payments that didn't just add up to help. They added up to a life built on my silence. Then I started noticing something I hadn't wanted to notice before. Certain emergency payments didn't match what my parents had told me. The timing was wrong. The explanations were vague. The amounts were inconsistent in a way that didn't feel accidental. I'd labeled some of them in my notes as support miscellaneous, or help urgent because that's what they'd called it. But when I lined up the dates with my memory, when I placed them beside the times my parents had said they needed to fly out to LA to help Marlo, the weeks they'd talked about her projects and campaigns and big opportunities, the pattern showed itself like an X-ray. Some of that money wasn't just keeping my parents afloat. Some of that money was propping up Marlo, quietly, indirectly, without ever telling me the truth. And suddenly the family dynamic I'd lived with my whole life had a financial spine. Marlo wasn't just emotionally favored. She was being funded. By me. I sat there in the dark, the laptop glow reflecting off the kitchen window, and it felt like my stomach dropped, not from surprise but from recognition, like my body had known before my mind allowed it to. Then came the second shift in the ground. After I canceled the transfers and blocked their numbers, I thought the fallout would be obvious. My parents would call, they'd panic, they'd demand answers. But what happened first was quieter and more calculated. A cousin I barely talked to texted me out of the blue. "Hey man, heard you've been off since the accident. Just checking in." Off. That single word told me everything. They weren't approaching this as a family crisis. They were approaching it as a narrative problem. If I stopped paying, I had to be unstable. If I called out what they'd done, I had to be confused. Because if I was sane, if I was clear, if I had reasons, then they were exactly what they were afraid the family might finally see. I read the message, then stared at the kitchen table where Ren's crayons were scattered and Cove's toy trucks were lined up like a little convoy. My kids had no idea what kind of war had just begun around them. They just knew I was home. They just knew I was theirs. And in that moment, I understood why I'd asked Idris to screenshot the group chat without even thinking. My parents were already building the story they planned to tell. And if I didn't have proof, numbers, dates, screenshots, they would bury me under their version of events before I ever opened my mouth. That's why the knock at my door 2 weeks later didn't just scare me. It felt like the story catching up. Like someone was finally stepping into the space my parents had controlled for years. I stood in my hallway, heart pounding, my palm pressed flat against the door. Who was out there? And how much did they know? The knock wasn't polite. It wasn't the tentative tap of a neighbor asking to borrow sugar or the delivery driver trying not to wake sleeping kids. It was firm, 3 clean raps, like whoever stood on the other side already knew I'd answer, even if I didn't want to. I froze in the hallway with my hand still smelling faintly of dish soap and pancake batter. My incision pulled when I shifted my weight. Ren's little voice floated from the living room, singing to herself the way she did when she was playing with her stuffed animals, while Cove made engine noises with his toy truck, perfectly happy in the small, safe world I'd fought so hard to keep steady. The house felt too quiet all at once. My first thought was my parents. Somehow. Even after the messages. Even after the silence. My body still carried that old reflex, the one that said they'll show up when it matters. The reflex didn't die easily. It just got bruised and shoved into a corner, waiting to embarrass you at the worst time. I moved toward the door carefully, one step at a time, like my own ribs might protest. I didn't call out. I didn't want to invite conversation through wood. The peephole narrowed the world into a single circle. A man stood on my porch, tall even with age, wearing a dark wool coat that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. His hair was silver and neatly combed back, and his posture, straight spine, squared shoulders, carried an authority that didn't come from being loud. It came from never having to be. Judge Ambrose Wynne. My grandfather. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. Not because I didn't want to. Because there was always an excuse floating down from my parents like a final verdict. "He's too busy, honey. He's never in town. He doesn't want visitors. Riven said he'll call you back, Dad. He's swamped." I'd believed them longer than I should have, because part of being the practical kid was taking people at their word and not creating drama. But seeing him there on my porch, on my actual street, in my actual life hit me with a jolt that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with realization. Someone had worked very hard to keep him away from me. I unlocked the door, the latch clicking louder than it should have, and pulled it open. For a second, we just looked at each other. He wasn't smiling. His eyes were sharp, familiar, and suddenly I was 8 again, sitting too straight at his dining table, trying to impress him with my best manners. Then he stepped forward and wrapped me in a hug so tight it made my incision flare with pain. I didn't tell him to let go. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there and let it happen because the truth was I couldn't remember the last time someone in my family held me like I was something worth keeping. "Riven," he said, voice rougher than I remembered. "Let me look at you." He pulled back hands on my shoulders like he needed to confirm I was real. His gaze dropped immediately to the way I stood slower, careful, and to the protective way my hand hovered near my abdomen as if my body still didn't trust itself. "You're healing," he said, not as a question. "I'm getting there." His mouth tightened in a line that looked like restraint, like he was containing something heavier than anger. Behind me, Cove's truck noises stopped. Wren patted closer, curiosity tugging her forward. "Daddy," Wren asked. I turned, forcing my face calm because I'd promised myself my kids would never feel the tension I grew up in. "Hey, bud." "Hey, Wren. This is your great-grandpa." Cove blinked up at him like he was assessing a new character in a story. Wren tilted her head, studying his face. My grandfather's expression softened in a way that surprised me, like a door opening quietly. He crouched carefully, despite his age bringing himself down to their level. "Well," he said, and there was warmth tucked under the gravel in his voice. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you two properly." Wren glanced at me for permission. I nodded. She stepped forward and offered him her stuffed bunny like a sacred object. Cove inched closer, still wary, but not afraid. My grandfather accepted the bunny with absolute seriousness. "Thank you," he told her as if she'd handed him something priceless. And just like that, the air in my entryway changed. I ushered him inside. He wiped his shoes without being asked. Old habits, courtroom habits. The kind that made everything feel orderly even when your life wasn't. We sat at my kitchen table while Wren and Cove played within sight, occasionally peeking over as if to make sure he was still there. I poured coffee with hands that didn't quite know what to do with themselves. My grandfather watched me move, watched the small winces I tried to hide, and his eyes sharpened again. "I know," he said finally. I paused with the mug halfway to the table. "You know what I know about the accident. I know you were in emergency surgery." His voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath it. "And I know what your parents did." My throat tightened. He lifted a hand. "Don't. I didn't come here to force you to relive it." I stared at the coffee, watching a ripple tremble across the surface like my hand had shaken the table. "How did you find out Sable called me the night it happened?" he said. "Your aunt. My daughter. She didn't wait. She didn't soften it. She told me exactly what was said to you. Of course it was Sable. My mother always treated Aunt Sable like an inconvenience, too blunt, too perceptive, too unwilling to smile and pretend. Sable was the only person in my family who'd ever looked directly at the imbalance and named it out loud." My grandfather leaned forward slightly. "I also know you've been supporting your parents financially for years." My chest went tight, not with guilt, but with the strange sensation of being seen. I never told anyone that." "You didn't have to," he said. "I've suspected for a long time that something was off. The way Helen and Cal spoke about you, the way they spoke about Marlo, the way you were always fine, always busy, always handling it." His gaze flicked to the living room where my kids were now lined up on the rug, arranging blocks with the seriousness of engineers. "You don't end up a single parent in residency without carrying more than anyone," should he continued. "And yet the stories I heard about you were always controlled. Controlled." That word landed hard. He set his hands flat on the table, palms down like he was anchoring himself. Riven. I've been told for years you don't want visitors, that you don't have time, that you don't want to be bothered. My stomach dropped slow and sick. I never said that. I know he said. Because I know how you are. And because your Aunt Sable confirmed what I already suspected. He didn't say the rest directly, but it was there in the space between us. Your parents have been managing access to you, managing information, keeping you in a role. The giver. The quiet one. The one who doesn't make noise. He reached into his coat and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. The paper looked thick, formal, like something from another era. He slid it across the table toward me. My 70th birthday, he said. Chestnut Hill, Boston, next Saturday. I stared at it, my fingers hovering. The whole family will be there, he added. My pulse kicked up. Grandpa? I'm not doing this for spectacle, he said, cutting through my hesitation with a calm I recognized from every time I'd seen him speak at family events. And I'm not doing it for vengeance. That word hung in my mind anyway, even though he didn't say it like a threat. I'm doing it because if this happens behind closed doors, Helen will deny it. Cal will minimize it. Marlo will spin it. And you'll be left standing there wondering if you're crazy for remembering what happened. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. The exact fear I'd been trying not to name. He looked at me steadily. I spent 40 years on the bench. I learned something simple. Facts don't need screaming. They just need daylight. My fingers finally touched the envelope. Then he asked very gently, "Do you have records?" I let out a breath that felt like confession. I have a spreadsheet, bank statements, the transfer history, and the message he asked. I asked Idris to screenshot it, I said. The group chat, timestamps, everything. My grandfather nodded, once satisfied, like a piece had clicked into place. Good. He leaned back slightly. I want you to prepare a summary, by date, by amount, mortgage, insurance, repairs, anything else. And I want you to note what they told you each payment was for when you can. My stomach turned. Why? Because I intend to speak next Saturday, he said. And I intend to ask questions your parents can't answer without lying. The words were quiet, but the promise in them was loud. I looked toward the living room again. Wren was stacking blocks, carefully, tongue poking out in concentration. Cove knocked one over and giggled like he'd invented comedy. My life was right there, small and bright and fragile. What if they hate me? I heard myself ask. It sounded younger than 31. My grandfather's expression softened, but his voice stayed firm. The ones who matter won't. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm and steady. And the ones who do, he said, never deserved you. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to let it be simple. But my body still carried a lifetime of conditioning. Family means endure, family means absorb, family means keep the peace. As if he could read that exact thought, my grandfather added, "You're not the one breaking anything. You're just refusing to keep holding up a lie." Before he left, he stood in the doorway and looked back at my kids one more time. Wren waved shyly. Cove waved like a politician. My grandfather smiled, a small, real thing. Next Saturday, he said. Be ready. The door closed behind him and my house felt different. Like a window had opened somewhere, letting in air I didn't realize I'd been missing. I turned back to the kitchen to clear the mugs, but my phone buzzed on the counter. A message. From a cousin I barely spoke to. Heard you and your parents had a falling out. Marlo's been saying you've been acting erratic since your accident. Just wanted to give you a heads up. My hand went still. Erratic. Acting. Since your accident. I stared at the screen, the words cold and precise, and I understood something with absolute clarity. They weren't waiting to see what I'd do. They were already moving. They weren't just denying what happened. They were preparing to make sure no one believed me when I said it out loud. I looked toward the living room again at Wren and Cove, and my fear sharpened into something else, something more focused. I wasn't afraid of being disliked. I was afraid of being erased, and I knew right then I was going to Boston. Because ever since the night I nearly died and got called a nuisance and a burden, the old life was gone. There was no gentle way back to it. There was only forward into the truth or into silence that would swallow me whole. The days leading up to Boston didn't feel like preparation for a birthday party. They felt like I was assembling a life raft while someone on shore tried to convince everyone watching that I was drowning on purpose. Recovery after surgery is supposed to be straightforward: rest, walk a little each day, don't lift anything heavy, let your body do what bodies do. But life doesn't pause because you've been stitched back together. Ren still needed baths. Cove still needed to be coaxed into brushing his teeth. Lunches still had to be made. Laundry still piled up like it took personal offense when I ignored it. I moved through my home slowly, careful with my core smiling through the dull ache that throbbed whenever I bent the wrong way. And in between all the normal things, I started doing something I'd never done before. I started checking. I checked the windows at night, making sure the locks were flipped. I checked the peephole twice before opening the door to accept groceries. I checked the camera on my doorbell like I expected to see someone I didn't want standing there watching my porch with too much patience. I checked my phone so often my thumb developed muscle memory for it. It wasn't paranoia the way people like to joke about. It was a new awareness my reputation had become something someone else could try to destroy with a few well-placed sentences. And once that happened, facts wouldn't land the way they should. If they could make me sound unstable, then everything I said could be dismissed with one shrug. He's stressed. He's confused. He's been through a lot. You know how he gets. That was the strategy. I could feel it. So when the house went quiet at night, when Ren and Cove finally collapsed into sleep and the dishwasher hummed like white noise, I sat at my laptop in the dim light of my kitchen and opened the spreadsheet. It looked the same as it always had: rows, columns, dates, notes. But it didn't feel like budgeting anymore. It felt like building a case file. I structured it the way I'd want information presented if I were sitting in a room full of people who didn't know me well enough to trust my voice. Year by year, month by month, I created clear categories: mortgage payments, insurance premiums, repairs and maintenance, emergencies, cash transfers. I added totals at the bottom of each year, then a grand total for the whole 8-year span. 96 consecutive mortgage payments. 96. That number made my stomach tighten every time I typed it, because it wasn't just proof of money, it was proof of time. Proof of routine. Proof of expectation. Proof that just this once had turned into my parents building their entire stability on the assumption that I would never stop. As I organized, the records, patterns I'd avoided seeing for years started to appear with embarrassing clarity. There were months where a so-called emergency appeared right after my mom told me casually that they had to fly out to Los Angeles because Marlo needed them. There were times a vague request hit my phone within days of Marlo posting photos about a new project, a new campaign, a new opportunity. I didn't need access to her bank statements to understand what was happening. I was paying the mortgage that kept my parents comfortable. And I was also, in ways I hadn't fully admitted to myself, helping keep Marlo's life polished, helping keep her shine intact without ever being told the truth. I sat back in my chair and stared at the totals, the cursor blinking like a slow heartbeat. All those nights I'd told myself it was normal, that families help each other, that I could handle it, that it wasn't worth a fight. And then in one single text message I'd been reduced to a nuisance, a burden. Like I was the problem in their lives, not the foundation of it. The next morning, my incision aching from sitting too long, I texted Idris. "Hey, do you still have those screenshots from the group chat?" He responded almost immediately. "Yeah, date and timestamps are visible. I saved them." Relief slid through me like a warm drink. I asked if he could send them, and within minutes my phone chimed with the images: my mother's words in black and white, my father's dismissal, my sister's reaction. I stared at them until the screen dimmed. Then Idris called. His voice was careful, the way it had been in the ambulance. "You okay?" "I'm fine." I lied automatically. He didn't let it pass. "Riven, when you called them, I heard voices in the background. More than one person. They weren't asleep. They weren't stuck somewhere. They were together." I closed my eyes. I'd known that. I'd heard it. but hearing Idris confirm it tightened the screws. They can't claim they didn't know, he added. They can't claim they didn't pick up. They answered. They chose. It didn't hurt more. The hurt was already maxed out. What it did was harden something in me. Thanks, I said quietly. For saving those. Any time, Idris replied. And then softer. You don't deserve what they did to you. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and listened to the sounds of my kids playing, the soft thud of blocks hitting carpet, the occasional squeal of laughter. Those sounds were the reason I couldn't afford to be dismissed as unstable. Because if people believed I was unstable, then the story could swallow not just me but my ability to be taken seriously as a father, a doctor, a person. 3 days before my flight, Aunt Sable showed up at my door with a tote bag and the kind of expression that meant she wasn't here for small talk. She hugged me carefully, mindful of my incision, and then sat down at my kitchen table like she owned it. In a way she did. She was the first blood relative who'd shown up without an agenda. Let me see it, she said. I handed her the binder I'd started assembling: printed statements, transfer confirmations, the spreadsheet summary. She flipped through it page by page, her jaw tightening with each turn. This is worse than I thought, she said finally. I didn't respond. I just watched her because hearing someone else name it made it feel less like my private shame. Sable tapped a page with her fingernail. You need a 2-page summary your grandfather can read out loud. Simple, clean, dates, amounts, no emotion. I wasn't planning to speak, I admitted. I was going to let him handle it. He will, she said, but you still need to be prepared. I frowned. Prepared for what? Sable leaned forward, lowering her voice like the walls might be listening. They're not going to argue with numbers, Riven. They'll argue with you. The way she said my name made my throat tighten. They're already doing it, she continued. Marlowe's been calling relatives, aunts, cousins, anyone who matters in that family web. She's telling them you're overwhelmed, that you're spiraling, that after the accident you've been imagining things. My stomach went cold. I got a text about me acting erratic. Sable nodded once. Your mother's playing the victim, crying, saying you cut them off for no reason, saying they're terrified for you. The word terrified almost made me laugh. Almost. Sable's eyes softened, but her voice stayed sharp. They're laying the groundwork so that when the truth comes out, everyone's already been primed to doubt you. I rubbed a hand over my face. The skin around my eyes felt tight with exhaustion. So what do I do? Just let them talk? You stay steady, she said. You stay boring. You stay factual. The second you get emotional, they'll point and say, see, he's unstable. I swallowed the bitter taste that rose in my mouth. I shouldn't have to perform calm just to be believed. I know, Sable said, quick and certain, but you're not dealing with fair people. You're dealing with people who survive by controlling the story. Her words landed like a diagnosis. That night after Sable left, my phone buzzed again. A cousin, one of the ones who liked to play neutral, sent a message that tried to sound casual. So, I heard you've been keeping all the statements. My fingers went cold around my phone. They knew. Or they suspected. Which meant the smear wasn't random. It wasn't gossip. It was strategy. They were accelerating it because they could feel the ground shifting under them. I didn't reply. Instead, I went back to my laptop, tightened my summary printed duplicates, and slid everything into a folder that would fit neatly into my bag. The whole time I worked, I kept hearing Sable's voice in my head. They'll argue with you. 2 days before the flight, I called my grandfather to confirm details: pickup time, address, whether he wanted me to stay at the house or a nearby hotel with the kids. He answered on the second ring. Riven. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal. Just confirming Saturday. I'm booking everything now. Good, he replied. I'm glad you're coming. I hesitated. I wanted to make sure you have my address too. In case there was a pause. I don't, he said simply. My stomach dipped. You don't? No, he said. Your mother has always said you prefer privacy, that you didn't want anyone dropping by. that you'd reach out when you could. My grip tightened on the phone. I stared at the wall at the framed drawing Ren had made of our family with 3 stick figures and a huge sun. I never said that I whispered. I know my grandfather said, and his voice changed, softened, darkened with understanding. That's why I'm telling you now. For a moment I couldn't speak. The realization was so sharp it felt physical. The isolation hadn't been an accident. It had been maintained, curated. A controlled environment where I could be used without interference. My grandfather exhaled slowly. Riven, listen to me. Whatever happens next Saturday, you keep your head up. You're not walking into that house to beg for approval. You're walking in with the truth. After I hung up, I sat very still at my kitchen table while the house settled around me. Outside, Aurora was quiet. A normal neighborhood, normal streets, people walking dogs, kids riding scooters. Life continuing like nothing was happening in my chest. Inside, I stared at the folder I'd assembled and understood the real shift that had happened. This wasn't just about money, or even about being abandoned during emergency surgery. This was about control of access, control of perception, control of who I was allowed to be in the family's eyes. And I wasn't going to Boston as a dutiful grandson attending a birthday celebration. I was going to Boston to reclaim the right to exist in my own story. I looked down the hallway toward the bedrooms where Ren and Cove slept, their door cracked open the way they liked it. Nightlight glowing soft on the carpet. I didn't know how the family would see me when I walked into that house in Chestnut Hill. As the problem, as the disappointment, as the one causing trouble, or as the person who finally stopped carrying everyone else and decided to stand upright. I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew I was done being defined by people who only loved me when I was useful. The flight from Colorado to Boston felt longer than it should have. Not because of the distance, but because my body still hadn't forgotten what it meant to be cut open and put back together. Every time I shifted in the seat, my abdomen reminded me that healing wasn't a clean line forward. It was a negotiation. I moved carefully, helped Ren buckle her seatbelt, lifted Cove with more caution than strength, and smiled through the dull ache that pulsed like a low warning. I carried one backpack for the kids and one slim briefcase that never left my side. Inside it were 2 versions of the same truth. The first was simple. 2 pages, clean numbers, dates, totals, something my grandfather could read aloud without interruption. The second was heavy. Statements, transfers, notes, screenshots. 8 years of quiet compliance printed into something that could no longer be waved away as imagination. Before boarding, I set rules for myself the way I would before a complicated procedure. No arguing, no raised voice, no reacting before my grandfather spoke. Everything would stay linear. Everything would stay factual. If I lost my composure, I would lose control of the room. And I knew now control was the only currency my parents had ever respected. When we landed, my grandfather had arranged for a driver. The kids were excited in the way children get when everything feels big and unfamiliar. I watched Boston slide past the windows, brick buildings, narrow streets, history layered on itself, and tried to steady my breathing. Chestnut Hill came into view slowly, deliberately. Wide lawns, old trees. Houses that didn't announce wealth so much as assume it. My grandfather's estate sat back from the road, white columns framing a wraparound porch. Cars lined the circular driveway, luxury sedans, polished SUVs, license plates from multiple states. A string quartet played somewhere inside the sound, drifting faintly through open windows like a soundtrack for a life that looked perfect from the outside. This was the setting my family loved most. This was where they became who they wanted to be seen as. I stepped out of the car with Ren holding my hand and Cove balanced on my hip. The pain flared sharp and brief, and I adjusted without letting it show. If I showed weakness here, it would be read as confirmation. Inside the house glowed. Crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, white tablecloths, laughter that bounced easily off the high ceilings. I saw my parents almost immediately. They stood near the fireplace, glasses in hand, relaxed in the way people are when they believe nothing can touch them. My father, Cal, looked distinguished in a dark suit, his posture confident, practiced. My mother, Lorraine, wore cream silk and smiled as she spoke to a cluster of relatives, her hand resting lightly on someone's arm like she belonged exactly where she stood. They hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I watched them. Not with anger, with a strange clinical clarity. This was the version of them the family knew. Polished, approachable, concerned parents who had, according to their story, been abandoned by a son who had changed. Then my mother looked up. Her smile faltered. Just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. My father followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. The warmth drained from his face like someone had turned off a light. Marlo appeared at his side as if summoned. She looked flawless. Expensive dress. Perfect hair. The same effortless confidence she'd always carried now, sharpened by something more alert. Her eyes flicked over me, my slower gait, the way I held Cove close before her mouth curved into concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Riven," she said, leaning in to brush my cheek. "I heard about your accident. Nothing too serious, right?" The words landed soft but strategic. I met her gaze steadily. Emergency surgery. Internal bleeding. Her smile twitched. Mom said it was mostly just a scare. Lorraine wasn't there. She hadn't seen me. She hadn't been in the ambulance. She hadn't been in the hospital room, but she'd already rewritten it. Marlo patted my arm gently like she was calming a nervous patient. "Well, you look okay now. That's what matters." She drifted away, already turning toward another conversation, and I felt the first ripple of unease in the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just a shift in air. A woman I barely recognized, a second cousin, maybe, approached me near the drinks table. "I'm so sorry you went through that," she said quietly. "Your mom told us it was just a fender bender." There it was. Not an omission. A deliberate downgrade. I nodded once. It wasn't. Her eyebrows lifted, confusion flickering across her face before she moved on, and just like that I understood the depth of it. They hadn't just failed to show up. They'd adjusted the story so they wouldn't look like the kind of people who don't show up. I focused on my kids, got them juice, helped Ren avoid spilling it on the carpet, kept my voice light, my presence neutral. That's when the first real strike came. We were near the dessert table, tiers of pastries arranged like an art installation, when I heard Marlo's voice rise just enough to carry. "I'm honestly worried about Riven," she said, not looking at me. Looking at the small circle of aunts and cousins around her. The accident really shook him. He's been saying some pretty wild things. Lorraine joined her, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "We've tried so hard," my mother said, voice trembling just right. "Calling, texting. He won't respond. He just cut us off out of nowhere." My father stood beside her, silent, shoulders slightly slumped. The image of the wounded parent. Marlo sighed. "He keeps saying we used him, that we took advantage of him. It's heartbreaking." The words floated through the room like a diagnosis. I felt eyes turn toward me. Curious, concerned, doubtful. A hand touched my arm. An older aunt leaned in, lowering her voice. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "are you seeing anyone? A therapist, maybe?" Another voice, softer. "Are you sure you remember everything clearly?" I didn't answer immediately. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled faintly and said, "I'm fine. Thank you for asking." Then I turned back to Ren and Cove, who were more interested in the tiny forks than in adult politics. That restraint felt like holding a muscle in place while it burned. But I understood the math. Every calm response stole momentum from their story. Every measured breath denied them proof. Across the room, I caught my grandfather's eye. He was watching, not intervening, not rescuing, observing, like a judge letting testimony run long enough for the contradictions to show themselves. The room felt heavier now. Conversations dipped and swelled. People glanced between me and my parents. The string quartet slowed, then stopped. Someone tapped a glass. My grandfather rose from his chair. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried. I straightened instinctively, Ren's small hand tightening in mine. This was the moment. and I wondered briefly sharply whether my father would let it happen. My grandfather had just begun to step forward when my father moved. Not rushed, not flustered. Controlled. Dad, Cal said, voice steady, stepping into the open space. Before you say anything, there's something the family should understand. The room stilled. I felt it immediately, the shift, the calculation behind it. If my father spoke first, he could frame everything that followed. He could turn my grandfather's words into something reactive, something defensive. This was his last chance to keep control. My grandfather stopped. Let him. Cal turned to face the room, palms open, posture practiced. As many of you know, Riven has been under a lot of stress. Residency, being a single father, the accident. He gestured toward me, the concerned parent addressing an audience. Since the surgery, he's been distant, cold. He cut off contact with us completely. No explanation. Lorraine stepped in beside him, eyes already wet. We've only ever wanted the best for him, she said softly. But he's been saying terrible things, accusing us of abandoning him, of not loving him. Marlowe's voice joined in light but precise. He's always had a tendency to overthink, even as a kid. Lately it's just intensified. A murmur rippled through the room. I felt the weight of it press against my chest, not anger, not panic, but the dangerous quiet of being assessed. If I reacted now, I would confirm everything they'd just said. If I stayed silent, they'd claim I couldn't respond. I did neither. I knelt slightly to Ren's level and brushed a crumb from her dress. Cove leaned into my side, his fingers clutching my shirt. I stayed still. My father continued. There may have been a misunderstanding the night of the accident, he said. We didn't realize how serious it was. We tried to call back. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That was a lie. I had the messages, the call logs, the screenshots. Idris. But I didn't move. Not yet. Marlowe added. We were worried sick. She mentioned the wrong hospital. Just a name. Just a slip. But enough. I saw a few heads turn, a few brows furrow. People who knew Boston hospitals well enough to catch the mistake. My grandfather finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Richard, he said using my father's full name, let me ask you something. The room went silent. My father hesitated. Of course. My grandfather looked at him evenly. Who has been paying your mortgage for the past 8 years? The question hung there. Heavy. My father opened his mouth, closed it. Lorraine's face drained of color. I felt Ren's hand tighten around mine. And for the first time since I'd walked into that house, I knew. The story they'd built was about to collapse under the weight of something they couldn't smooth over. Numbers, dates, facts, and the truth waiting patiently in a folder at my side. The room didn't move. Not a chair, not a glass, not a breath loud enough to interrupt the silence that followed my grandfather's question. The chandeliers above us glowed warmly, absurdly out of sync with the cold stillness that settled over everyone standing beneath them. I stood near the dessert table with Ren pressed against my leg and Cove half hidden behind me. I could feel every set of eyes without looking up. It felt less like a party now and more like a courtroom stripped of ceremony. No benches, no oath, just people waiting to see who would break first. My grandfather didn't raise his voice when he repeated himself. Who has been paying your mortgage for the past 8 years? My father cleared his throat. Dad, that's not... It's a simple question, my grandfather said evenly. Answer it. Cal shifted his weight. We've handled our finances. Riven helped us a few times, sure, but Lorraine stepped in quickly, her hand gripping his sleeve. He offered, she said. He never struggled. We never forced him. The words hit with familiar precision. This was their instinct: minimize, soften, recast. Turn 8 years into a few times. Turn obligation into generosity. Turn dependence into coincidence. I understood then that even now exposed in front of their own relatives, they were still trying to shrink me. My grandfather nodded once as if he'd expected this. Let's be clear, he said calmly. Because words get slippery when people are uncomfortable. He opened the folder in his hands. The sound of paper shifting carried farther than it should have. This, he continued, is a financial record covering 8 consecutive years, organized by month, verified by bank statements. He held up the first page so the room could see the structure columns, totals, clean lines. Not accusation, accounting. Mortgage payments, he read. 96 consecutive months. Not missed. Not delayed. He paused, letting the number sit in the air. A murmur rippled through the crowd. 96, he repeated. That is not occasional help. That is a system. Lorraine's mouth opened, then closed again. My grandfather turned the page. Health insurance premiums, he continued. Covered during periods when Richard was no longer insured through employment. Another page. Vehicle repairs, home repairs, emergency transfers. He didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. He read like someone stating weather conditions. Then he reached the section marked with simple notes in the margin. There are also irregular transfers, he said, labeled emergency or support. These coincide repeatedly with periods when Marlowe was beginning new projects, traveling, or requiring assistance. He didn't look at my sister when he said her name. He didn't have to. A few heads turned toward her anyway. Subtle, instinctive. My grandfather flipped to the summary page. The total, he said, is not insignificant. It is not ambiguous. And it cannot be dismissed as imagination. The room felt smaller now. Denser. He closed the folder gently and set it on the table beside him. Then he asked questions that weren't financial. How many times did you say thank you? He asked my parents quietly. How many weekends did you show up when he became a single father? How many times did you visit him in the hospital after emergency surgery? No one answered. There was nothing they could say that wouldn't contradict something already spoken. My grandfather let the silence stretch. Then he reached into the folder again, not for numbers this time. Now he said, let's address the night that has been described here as confusion. He looked around the room, once ensuring attention. Riven was in an accident, he said. Internal bleeding. Emergency surgery. This is documented. He held up his phone screen, facing outward. He contacted his parents, asking for one thing: temporary care for his children while he was on the operating table. He read the message aloud. Exactly. Without commentary. The words landed hard. Nuisance, burden, Taylor Swift tickets. Figure it out yourself. The room didn't erupt immediately. It inhaled. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." My grandfather didn't stop. He read my father's response, casual, dismissive. Then he read Marlowe's reaction. A few people turned fully toward her now. Her face had gone pale, the practiced composure slipping just enough to reveal something raw beneath it. My father stared at the floor. My mother shook her head, tears streaming, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The story they'd built couldn't survive this. Not because of anger, because of clarity. People didn't need to be told what to think. They could see it. I watched it happen in small ways. Someone stepping back from my parents, a cousin folding her arms and shaking her head, an aunt reaching out to touch my shoulder just briefly but deliberately. My grandfather closed the folder. I'm not here to demand judgment, he said. I'm here to present facts. What anyone chooses to do with them is their own responsibility. He turned to me. Riven, he asked gently, do you want to say anything? I felt the room tilt toward me. I stepped forward slowly, aware of my body, my breath, my children's presence grounding me. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, I said. My voice was steady. I didn't even want to speak. I paused, letting that settle. I spent years being the one who didn't need anything, the one who could handle it, the one who wouldn't make things uncomfortable. I glanced at my parents. That night in the hospital taught me something. I wasn't strong in their eyes. I was convenient. A ripple moved through the room. I'm done paying to be tolerated, I continued. I've stopped financial support. I've taken space. That's not revenge. That's survival. I inhaled slowly. If there's ever a future relationship, it won't be built on denial or rewriting. It will start with acknowledgement, not apologies designed to move on, accountability. I looked down at Ren and Cove, then back up. I won't return to the old cycle. My father started to speak. "This is humiliating," he said sharply. "You've made your point. Are you satisfied now?" I met his gaze without raising my voice. "I'm done," I said. "That's not the same thing." And I knew as his jaw tightened and the room held its breath that the truth was no longer mine to defend. What mattered now was what came after. My parents left early. Not in protest, not in fury. They simply gathered their things and walked out. No one stopped them. No one followed. No one said they understood. In families like ours, silence is the sharpest verdict. After they were gone, messages began arriving slowly, awkwardly. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years apologized. Some admitted they'd always found the stories about me confusing, but had never questioned them. Others said nothing at all, but stayed close, offering quiet support through presence rather than words. The family group chat went still. Then it disappeared. Weeks later, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. She left a voicemail. Everything was exaggerated. "You hurt us. Why are you tearing the family apart?" I listened once, then deleted it. Not out of spite, out of understanding. 3 months later, Aunt Sable told me my parents were selling the house. Without my transfers, they couldn't maintain it. They moved in with a relative who insisted on something new: responsibility. Marlowe lost a contract soon after. Word travels differently when truth replaces polish. As for me, I rewrote my spreadsheet. The category once labeled support parents became protect kids, college funds, emergency care, help when I needed it. A year later, my life was quieter, healthier. I no longer bought affection. I no longer earned love by disappearing. And my children would never grow up believing care was conditional. That was the inheritance I chose to